Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaisamansha Shri Rupam Sagajatam Sagana Ragunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Paridana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamsha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Randavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sate Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatadeshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, everyone. So, welcome to this continued study of chapter, or of Bhagavad Gita. We're beginning now today, chapter 3. So, we've been talking about the yoga ladder, and now we're going to be entering in chapter 3 the topic of karma yoga, and more specifically Nishkam karma yoga. And we talked about this yoga ladder. As one moves from the lower rungs to the top rungs, one increases in purification and in knowledge. And so in this section, the first 12 verses, we're going to see a lot about this topic of purification and when it is appropriate to renounce and when it is not. And so we'll be discussing this. These verse references are, of course, from chapter 2. And I'll set up the references for chapter 3 here next week. But the main point here is, again, as we progress in our consciousness, in our knowledge, and as the heart purifies, one comes to the higher rungs of the ladder, ultimately concluding in bhakti. And again, in these purports, Srila Prabhupada is speaking about devotional service to guide us, as this is the ultimate end of where we want to end up, though the verses themselves often refer to karma yoga or nishkam karma yoga. So we'll not get too hung up into the details of the distinctions. Let's get the basic understanding of the distinctions, but we're not going to get too hung up into the details of those distinctions, okay? Now, last week we talked about Arjuna's brilliant 4 questions, and they were brilliant for 2 reasons. One, the fact that he inquired. This process of inquiry is very important in our process of devotional service because it allows us to understand things without doubt, which then one can become enthusiastic in the pursuit of. With doubts, we hold back. And so Arjuna inquired, but he also inquired in detail, in a way to understand, and he wanted to understand, who is this person fixed in divine consciousness? And he asked these 4 questions. What are the symptoms of that person? Meaning, what are the characteristics and how are they revealed? How does he speak? How is his mind and words affected when he meets neutrality, someone favorable, and someone not favorable? How are they affected? Now, how does he sit? What is the mood of that person when their senses are restrained or controlled? And finally, how does a person actually use their senses? How do they engage in the senses? Right? So these four things speak to the details of what Arjuna was trying to understand. And in summary, we understood that one in divine consciousness is known by their cessation of material activities. They no longer have any material desires. That is the overarching or broad view. So one's progress in devotional service is not a function of time, is not a function of initiation status, is not a function of title or position. It is a function of how much one has renounced their material desires. And Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur used to always give this metric to measure how one is progressing in devotional service. So for ourselves, it is a nice metric. We can look at it in maybe 6-month increments. Don't look at it in daily increments because our material afflictions go up and down. But if we look at it in chunks of 6 months or even 3 months or a year, we can say, hey, am I more or less materially attached? And sometimes in devotional service, we get this flat line. So on the flat line, we want to try to continue to progress. But this is the metric. And the activities of the Stitta Prajna is their senses are very controlled. But they are not controlled in a sense of stopping the senses. They are controlled in a sense that they are properly engaged. They are used in Krishna's service. That is it. Otherwise, they have no activity. And so we saw that as the general theme of this last section of chapter 2. And it's the goal that we are going. So can someone go on mute? There's a little bit of background noise. Thank you. So that took us now to, or brings us now to chapter 3. Right? And in chapter 3, Krishna is going to discuss the best ways to purify our consciousness so that we can achieve self-realization. Again, this purification is what defines our ascent on that yoga ladder. So Krishna is going to discuss what is the best way to purify so that we can become self-realized and ultimately engage in bhakti, the devotional service to the Lord. Krishna is going to explain how karma yoga, or working in yoga, is the superior process to the inactive, right? So the ultimate way to resolve Arjuna's challenge is to get him to realize who he is. And so Krishna is going to answer the question. And, in chapter 2, we heard about Sankhya Yoga and Jnana and Karma Yoga and Buddhi Yoga and Nishkam Karma Yoga. And maybe our heads are spinning a little bit trying to put it all together. Well, you can imagine Arjuna hearing this in just a matter of few minutes and trying to hold it all together. We've been studying it for a few weeks, right? So naturally, of course, he is not confused. But for our benefit, he is saying, I have not fully understood these points completely. So what does a good student do? He asks a question. So he opens chapter 3, like he opens many of these chapters, with a question. So in the first verse, Arjuna said, O Janardana, O Keshava, why do you want me to engage in this ghastly warfare if you think that intelligence is better than fruit of work? So Arjuna has misunderstood the 49th verse of the second chapter, in which Krishna said, O Dhananjaya, keep all abominable activities far distant by devotional service, and that consciousness surrender unto the Lord. Those who want to enjoy the fruits of their work are misers. So here, Krishna in the second chapter said, keep all abominable activities far away. So Arjuna is thinking that why do you want me to engage in this warfare if buddhi, intelligence, is better than fruit of work? He said the fruit of works are misers, right? So this reference now is what's the best way to do this. According to Arjuna's understanding, the best way, using his own intelligence, was to avoid fighting, was to avoid the sin by avoiding the fight. That is what his intelligence had told him, right? But Krishna is saying avoid sinful reactions by using your intelligence to keep abominable work far. So what happens is Arjuna is thinking that Buddhi Yoga, this intelligence with yoga, is some kind of retired life, as Srila Prabhupada says in the purport. That doing austerities in the forest, not engaging in politics and warfare, isn't Buddhi Yoga simply to renounce active life and live in penance and austerity? That is what Arjuna has confused. And when we have confusion, what we should do, we should inquire. And this is Arjuna's wonderful example. When something's not clear, he put the question in front of his guru. Why are you asking me to fight? Please explain. So this question now Krishna is going to answer in chapter 3. How to work in Krishna consciousness. Krishna consciousness is not inertia, but it is actually active engagement. Because premature renunciation will lead to one's fall down, and that is going to be the key theme of today's discussion. Okay? So now Arjuna makes a very important statement in verse 2. My intelligence is bewildered by your unequivocal instructions. Therefore, please tell me decisively which will be most beneficial for me. Tell me which is best. The two things that he was told: use intelligence to meditate on the difference between spirit and matter, I'm not this body, or to do my duty and fight karma. Right? One is jnana, one is karma. Which is best, he's asking, to fight or to meditate? And Arjuna wants to know, tell me the one thing that I should do. So is this fighting part of the divine consciousness, this Sthitta Prajna, or not? Right? So he wants to know, jnana or karma, which should I do, active or inactive? And so Arjuna is wants to know systematically what is best. Right? Now what we see here is a very important instruction for us as sadhakas aspiring to advance in the process of devotional service. If one wants to advance very quickly to really experience the bliss of devotional service, Arjuna is laying out a very important point for us. And we discussed this at length at the beginning of the second chapter, but it's worth repeating. And it's worth repeating because what Arjuna did here is very difficult. He put forth his question, he made his initial question in verse 1. And then in verse 2, he reinforces his question, just as he did in verse 2:7 and then in 2:8. Right? He reinforced his surrender to Krishna from verse 7 in verse 8 when he says that even winning an unrivaled kingdom will not dispel my illusion. So to reinforce that he really wants to know. Now what Arjuna, and the way he asked his question in the first verse, is tell me which you think is better. But now in the second verse, Arjuna says, tell me decisively what is most beneficial for me. And here we learn the art of asking questions. Because Arjuna is not asking to have his desires sanctioned. Krishna, can I renounce the forest? No, instead he's asking Krishna, tell me what you think is best for me. And in doing so, Arjuna is surrendering his free will. He has recognized, again, he is in this mood, as we're going to see in a moment, for our benefit, that I am not responsible with my free will. My free will brought me into this mess in the first place. So instead, Krishna, you tell me what's best for me. And this is a very difficult and rare position to come to. When a devotee can truly surrender their free will to Guru and say, you tell me what's best for me. It's not easy. But when one does so, taking this not easy path, one actually advances in Krishna consciousness so rapidly and truly tastes the bliss of devotional service. So it's a rare soul who can truly approach their inquiry in this mood and say, tell me what's beneficial for me. Because one has to be prepared that the answer that comes is not what we want to hear. And that's what makes it difficult. I often speak about there are two things that are, difficult in the practice of devotional service. One is this extreme following. And the second is consistency. To be consistent in our devotional service. So many obstacles will come. So many other ideas will come. But to be consistent and to follow in this way. And if you see our past acharyas, you'll find these two characteristics very profound and deep in their actions and in their consciousness. Certainly from Srila Prabhupada to, great, if you study the pastimes in Chaitanya Charitamrita, particularly the principal associates, particularly in Antya Lila, you're going to see this characteristic and this mood shown very vividly. So, again, I wanted to spend just a few minutes on this because this point is very important. Not easy to do. But for those who do it, there is a great, great reward, and that is experiencing the bliss of devotional service. So to ask the questions in this way, what is most beneficial for me? It means we are surrendering our own desires, our own free wills of what I want to do to the spiritual master, to those guiding us in the process of devotional service, and it is a great reward. But it's rare, but we can aspire to do it because it is worth it, and you'll see great benefit. Okay? So now, Arjuna's questions are answered by Krishna. So in the third verse, the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, O sinless Arjuna, I have already explained that there are two classes of men who try to realize the self. Some are inclined to understand it by empirical and philosophical speculation, and others by devotional service. So there are two classes of men who try to realize the self. Realize the self as servant of Krishna. One is through this empirical speculation, and that is Sankhya Yoga. And the other is by Karma Yoga or devotional service. We'll put those together into one bucket. So there are two paths. But we should understand that there is only one goal for both paths. They're not different goals. Both paths have the single goal, and that is to realize the self, our eternal relationship with the Lord, right? And achieve the supreme goal, the sambandha, avideya, and prayojana. The relationship, the process, and the fruit, the result. Right? So that is the goal, is to realize those three things. And there are two ways to achieve it. One is through the inactive path, and one is through the active path. So this Sankhya Yoga, again, we're not going to go so deep into it, but pull out from Srila Prabhupada's purport, the basics. That is coming to Krishna consciousness. Remember, that is the goal, coming to Krishna consciousness by the process of speculation and philosophical analysis. It's some level of pratyaksha praman, this direct experimentation. And gradually, emphasizing the word gradually, one comes to Krishna consciousness after searching out the whole world. It will end in bhakti, where this active process we'll discuss, devotional service, actually begins. So the second process, specifically buddhi yoga or bhakti, coming to Krishna consciousness by the process of working in Krishna consciousness. So in this path, one directly goes to Krishna consciousness. Use everything in daily encounters to serve Krishna. Right? So in the 61st verse of second chapter, Krishna said that buddhi yoga means to restrain one's senses and fix the consciousness on Krishna, if one is intelligent. Right? So use the senses for the service of Krishna. Everything material in the world can be applied in the service of Krishna, and everything we do should be used to serve him. And this is what Rupa Goswami taught us in Nectar of Devotion, around the concept of yukta vairagya, this anashaktasya vishayam yatadam upayanjate nirbandha Krishna sambandhe yuktam vairagya uchyate. That using all the things in the service of Krishna, but not using anything for one's own sense gratification. Right? So these are the two paths, the Sankhya process, and we can call it the Karma Yoga, Buddhi Yoga, or devotional service path. But think about one is inactive and one is active. Okay? Now in the purport, Srila Prabhupada establishes why the active or Buddhi Yoga path is better than Sankhya. And he gives 4 reasons why they are better. Note, you may see this question later on at some point in the future. So, there are 4 reasons that this Buddhi Yoga is better or recommended. The first is, one in the Buddhi Yoga path depends on Krishna fully. So one gets Krishna's mercy, and thus controlling the senses become easy. In both processes, one must control the senses, as we learned in the whole last section of chapter 2. Okay. And there, remember, Srila Baladev Vidabhushan commented that in the word matpara, that the senses can be controlled only by the strength of devotional service to Krishna. So, we get to depend on Krishna. In the inactive path, one has to depend on their own ability, their own determination to make progress, and that is very fallible. Second reason is Buddhi Yoga does not depend on any philosophical process to purify the senses. Krishna consciousness itself is the purifying process, meaning it's all in one. The activity purifies the senses. Whereas in the inactive path, one has to rely on the philosophical speculation to become inspired not to engage the senses in matter. It's very difficult. It's very dry and very challenging. So that is the second reason. The third reason, Prabhupada says, there's no flaw in the process, because it is being inspired by the Supreme Lord. In the inactive process and this progressive stage towards self-realization, the flaw is that one may never complete it. One may get distracted. One may never understand the end goal, because one is relying on their own ability. And thus there is a flaw. And the fourth reason Prabhupada guides to is that Buddhi Yoga is easy and sublime. It's very pleasurable. One gets to engage their senses in bhakti. Who doesn't enjoy singing and dancing with the Lord, honoring wonderful prasadam, enjoying festivals? It's a sublime process, chanting the holy names of the Lord. Right? So it's not a dry and difficult. So, yes, the goal is one, but the paths are very different. And of course, Krishna is going to give his conclusive instruction of which is better coming up in a few verses. Right? So, in the purport now, Srila Prabhupada makes this very, maybe somewhat famous line, where he says, religion without philosophy is sentiment, and philosophy without religion is mental speculation. So this is a line that we may have heard in the past. Actually, it's a quote from Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur. He wrote this in one of his writings. This line, religion without philosophy is sentiment, and philosophy without religion is speculation. So the point here is that religion and philosophy are interdependent. You can't have one without the other. Religion, meaning some faith. That faith must be based on some philosophy. Otherwise, it's just sentimental thoughts. And that's what we see, a lot of, so-called faiths based on just one's ideas. But that faith, that religion, it must be based and grounded on some hard philosophy, some science. That's why Prabhupada used to always say, the science of self-realization. Right? So that is combining two. Whereas philosophy, without any religion, without any understanding of a superior goal, without any concept of Krishna, it's simply guessing. It's speculation. Right? So these two become combined in importance. That there must be an aspect of faith, but there must be a foundation of philosophy. and those combine to make a nice, successful path. Final point I wanted to make is that Arjuna here is described or called out by Krishna as, O sinless one. Why is Krishna doing this? Krishna is reminding all of us, you and I, that Arjuna is not confused. Arjuna knows everything. Otherwise, how he can be sinless? But he's been put into this state to allow us to hear this message. Just as Arjuna called Krishna Achyutya, right? Which means infallible, when he was driving his chariot to remind us, this is the Supreme Lord. Similarly, Krishna here is reminding us that, O sinless one, is referring to Arjuna's position. And so we should understand that we are in the position of Arjuna's confusion, not he himself. One final comment I'll make is, in this verse, Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur's comments, speaking about karma and jnana as they are progressive steps, and the progression of steps is based on our faith, right? And that faith leads to that purity. If one is pure, then one can renounce the work. So it depends on the level of purity and faith of whether we should work or be inactive. And that is going to be answered for us now coming up. So the next 3 verses, Krishna is going to show what happens when one is not pure enough to renounce. The point being, one must purify of the material desires before they can renounce. Because if one does not purify before renouncing, one will not obtain the desired result of self-realization. Again, that is the goal. But if one does so prematurely, one will not. So the next 3 verses now Krishna is going to explain that. Not merely by abstaining from work can one achieve freedom from reaction, nor by renunciation alone can one attain perfection. Right? So Krishna is now going to say which is the better of the 2 paths. So just abstaining from work, one cannot avoid reactions, nor renouncing work can one achieve perfection. Right? So the requirement to renounce is one must be sufficiently purified. This purification is the key. Abruptly renouncing before one purifies the heart is dangerous, as we're going to see in the coming verses. So how to purify then, Krishna will also explain, starting in verses 7, particularly in verse 9. To do yajna, sacrifice, then one purifies. Right? So the Mayavadis say, as Prabhupada references in the purport, that just by taking sannyas, one automatically achieves the status of Narayan. Right? Immediate. But that's not what Krishna is saying. Krishna is saying, nor by a renunciation alone can one achieve perfection. So the process of renunciation doesn't guarantee the result, the desired result. One must do so when one is suitably qualified. And that qualification, again, is the level of our purification. Purification from what? Purification from the material desires, which was the symptom of the Sthitta Prajna. So we can see now how all this is very systematically connected from the end of chapter 2 into this process. Right? So now Krishna is going to speak about why it's so difficult to renounce work in the 5th verse. Everyone is forced to act helplessly according to the qualities he has acquired from the modes of material nature. Therefore, no one can refrain from doing something, not even for a moment. So why is it so hard to renounce? Because the nature of the soul is to be active. We see that the body moves with the presence of the soul. As soon as the soul leaves, the body becomes dead matter. Right? So the active nature that we have in this embodied position, it is based on the nature of the soul. Right? So the soul needs some engagement ultimately. So how do we work? According to the qualities we've acquired from the modes of material nature. They force us to act. We can't even be inactive for a few moments. Trying to make the mind inactive for just even a minute is so difficult. And so we have practical experience of it. So one has to work. Either one works for Krishna or one works for the senses, their own senses. So one works for Krishna or under Maya. That is the only choice. So what kind of work is best for us then, is what we have to understand. So Krishna again is saying that the point of sannyas or any purificatory process, Prabhupada says in the purport here at the end, therefore, sannyas or any purificatory process is to help reach the ultimate goal of becoming Krishna conscious, without which everything is considered a failure. So this is really important, that one must come to the point of bhakti ultimately, or there's no point of doing even one's prescribed duties or any kind of purificatory rituals. Right? And Prabhupada quotes the verse from Srimad Bhagavatam that references this very important point. So any process we do, it is fruitless unless it results in devotional service. So accepting sannyas, giving up one's prescribed duties, can be done only after one has been sufficiently purified by having done the prescribed duties in the right way, in the detached manner. So when one does their duties in a detached way, one purifies, and then one can renounce those duties. Right? So one takes to karma yoga to purify, and then from that detached action one can advance. Right? Now we see in our Vaishnava sannyasis that they also remain very active, fully working in Krishna consciousness, because devotional service is an active cultivation. It is an activity. Right? It is not about sitting idle, but it is actually about working for Krishna, and that is the highest platform. Yes, renouncing matter is a middle platform, but the ultimate platform is to learn how to work for Krishna. And that's why Srila Prabhupada used to always say, the idle mind is the devil's workshop. He designed this society, ISKCON, in a way in which people can be engaged 24/7, never lying idle for even a moment, because that is when danger creeps in. So, now the 6th verse, the final verse in this section, in which Krishna is speaking about the dangers of premature renunciation. And we get to the conclusion, which is, don't be a mityachar, a pretender. Krishna says, one who restrains the senses of action, but whose mind dwells on those sense objects, certainly deludes himself and is called a pretender. So what happens if we renounce prematurely? And what is again the measure of premature? The purification. Not measured by my age, by my duration in devotional service, by any other measure. The measure of premature means whether I'm purified or not. So if the heart is not purified, and if one renounces, the mind continues to dwell on the sense objects. That sannyasi is a pretender, just putting on the costume of the renunciate. Yes, one can buy one even on Amazon, but one cannot buy on Amazon the purification of the heart. So the difficult situation for the dry, speculative sannyasi is that they renounce the material world without having replaced it with something better. They haven't yet attached to Krishna consciousness. And in that state, one is in limbo. Because the slightest of material desires, without a full immersion of spiritual desires, means one will ultimately be dragged back to those material desires. So, it is a very difficult state. Right? Again, in Krishna consciousness, one is able to remove the material desires by replacing them with something better, the higher taste. So the desires are in line with Krishna consciousness, and one gets to act in nature of the soul, but act in a way that purifies. So devotional service is a process of converting material desires into spiritual desires. Renouncing the material desires does not necessarily manifest that. So the pure renunciate, the jnani, is in a very difficult place because they've detached materially, but they haven't attached spiritually. And so the slightest of lingering desire ultimately will drag them back to where they started. Whereas in Krishna consciousness, one is constantly converting material desires into spiritual desires. I want to go to a party. Now I want to go to Bhaktivinoda. Oh, I want to go see some nice art. Now I want to go see the beautiful form of the Lord. So the desires to see, to experience, they are not suppressed, they are just converted to a higher taste. And that is why the process of devotional service is so much better. Because otherwise we're just a pretender. And what is a pretender? One who wears the dress of a renunciate, but internally is meditating on all the material sense desires. And ultimately leads one to fall down because they haven't elevated their consciousness. They haven't lost that. And we know when one contemplates the sense objects, what happens? Lust. Lust to delusion, delusion to bewilderment, bewilderment to loss of intelligence, and ultimately fall down. Krishna explained this in that answering the third question of Arjuna. Right? So this renunciates, Prabhupada is speaking very vociferously, very prominently about, how they look advanced, but to the ignorant they seem advanced, but in fact they are just pretenders. Because advancement again is not based on just renouncing work; it's based on freeing of desires. Right? And this is the symptom that Krishna explained in the 2nd chapter, 55th verse. So better to work to purify than to renounce prematurely. That is the sum and substance of these 3 verses. And now getting us to Krishna's answer of Arjuna's question of what is the best and most beneficial for me. Now Krishna is going to answer that the attached sannyasi is better than the detached householder. Excuse me. I said that backwards, very poorly. That the detached sannyasi, the attached sannyasi, is actually less superior than the detached householder. Right? He'll compare one who is attached to the desires in the mood of a renunciate versus actually the detached householder, the karma yogi. Okay? Verse 7. On the other hand, if a sincere person tries to control the active senses by the mind and begins karma yoga in Krishna consciousness without attachment, he is by far superior. So now Krishna is giving his conclusive position. And that is, if one controls the senses by mind and begins Krishna consciousness or this karma yoga, he is best and far superior to renunciation. Krishna doesn't say, it's close, you can pick. No. He says it is far superior. And that is very important for us. This is the best option one can do. And why is this being recommended by Krishna? One, because engaging the senses is easier than trying to refrain the senses. But then one must know how to engage the senses. And that is doing so in a detached manner. We do the duty, do the work, but surrender the result. And the result of that detached work is purification of the consciousness, so that ultimately one can become fully Krishna conscious. Right? By purifying, one will come to the point of not working the way I want to work, that is karma yoga, but working the way Krishna wants me to work, that is bhakti yoga. Right? So that this is why Krishna is now instructing this path. It's active, which is better for us. When we engage the senses in detached work, one purifies and ultimately will bring one to the highest platform of bhakti. So the key point is, don't need to renounce to come to devotional service. One can stay in household life, stay in our jobs, stay in our home, but just be detached to the fruit, and that will take us to the highest platform. It is not the renunciation that will take one to the highest platform. It is the renunciation of the sense desires that will take us there. And that, again, what I mentioned earlier, Srila Prabhupada established ISKCON in a way that 24 hours a day, one can engage their senses in Krishna. From early morning Mangal Arti, to evening Bhagavad Gita classes, to Harinam in the middle of the day, Prasadam several times a day, to evening Artis and taking rest. All day long was an opportunity, right? So, and not just, advanced philosophers, but anyone can come and join, right? There's so much engagement, so many different opportunities in cooking and Harinam and reading and helping to print books and building temples. Prabhupada established so many activities. So no matter what our qualities are, what our nature is, there was some activity one can do in Krishna consciousness. And that's why in the early days, we saw so many, people able to join. If Prabhupada was establishing the inactive path of renounce the material world, and let's just speculate how many people would have joined, right? Not so much. So this is why, again, this karma on the jnana platform, knowing that I am not this body, I am spirit soul, is a recommendation from Krishna. Work in detached action. Because inactive is very difficult, and if detached to matter, but not yet attached to spirit, we're doomed. We're doomed. Right? So Krishna continues to speak about the active path, and it's a win-win situation. It's easy and it's pleasurable. So now Prabhupada in the purport, uses the nice verse, a sincere sweeper in the street is far better than the charlatan meditator who meditates only for the sake of making a living. So he's using some very, strong words, descriptive words. Show bottle spiritualism is used, to really denounce this, false renunciation, these pretenders. And the reason is because there's many amidst, our society today. And so to help us be free from those, he's speaking this way. Okay, 8th verse. Perform your prescribed duty, for doing so is for doing so is better than not working. One cannot even maintain one's physical body without work. So again, do your prescribed duty because it's better than not working. So Krishna is now re-emphasizing his point. One must work even to maintain the body, right? So that one has to eat, one has to do some basic activities. So Krishna is saying, do your duties. And how do we get our duties? We get our duties based on our past interactions with material nature. We acquire certain qualities. And those qualities put us into certain, prescribed duties. Like someone may like to cook, someone likes to fight, someone likes to manage, someone likes to cultivate crops. We have different natures. And there are activities, prescribed duties, that are situated according to our nature, so one can be very peaceful. This is the Varnashram system, right? We have the Varnas, the Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras, and we have the Ashrams, right? The Brahmachari, the Grihastha, the Sannyasi, and the Vanaprastha. So they allow us to be situated in a particular way that fits our nature, and thus can work in a peaceful way. If a Kshatriya with a temper tries to be Brahminical and very somber, it doesn't work, and vice versa. Right? But there is a prescribed duty for each of the different types of people, and that is the point of that. And the purpose, though, of our prescribed duties is to purify the senses. We get back to this purify. Right? So the prescribed duties in our Varnashram system, they're set forth to purify so that we can ultimately even move beyond the material prescribed duties. Prabhupada talked about the Swadharmas in chapter 2. Right? So when does the prescribed duties become no longer relevant? When one is transcended to bhakti. Then the prescribed duties become spiritual. They're no longer on the material platform. Right? So when one begins to work just for Krishna's pleasure, there is no other duty to perform. All duties are already performed by the practice of bhakti. So the prescribed duties that are purificatory to get to bhakti, they no longer are needed once one becomes into Krishna consciousness. Right? So we have various rituals and ceremonies, the Pinda ceremony, Shraddha ceremony, all these different rituals. When one is practicing Krishna consciousness, they need not necessarily be performed. They can be performed, but they are not necessary. And again, the specific nature that we are trying to purify from is our desire to control material nature, to enjoy our senses, that need to be the controller. That is what we are trying to purify. And that purification occurs from detached to action. When we acquire knowledge, which leads us to understand who is Krishna and who am I. So working in a detached way advances our self-realization. And that's why Prabhupada says in this verse, in the purport, such activities gradually cleanse the heart of a mundane man and free him from material contamination. So this idea of renouncing the material world is not possible. If we have a body, we have to do some work. We have to eat. And if we don't do so in a Krishna conscious way, as we'll see in a couple of verses next week, we'll verily eat sin. Okay, so now we'll get to the last section of today's discussion, the importance of yajna. So how to work is now the critical point for us. So Krishna says in the 9th verse, work done as a sacrifice for Vishnu has to be performed. Otherwise, work causes bondage in this material world. Therefore, O son of Kunti, perform your prescribed duties for his satisfaction. And in that way, you'll always remain free from bondage. So how to work is the key. We know working is more in line with the nature of the soul. But how to work is critical. Well, we want to work in a way that doesn't create bondage, meaning being bound to the cycle of birth, death, old age, and disease. So how to do that, where we create neither good reactions or neither bad reactions? It is by doing everything as a sacrifice to Vishnu, yajna. Right? So Srila Prabhupada says in the purport, very, very nice verse, he says, comment, this is the art, the great art of doing work. And then later he says, this practice will not only save one from the reactions of work, but also gradually elevate one to the transcendental loving service of the Lord. So this is the great art of performing work. Do yajna. So specifically, this is Nishkam Karma Yoga. Right? Work without desire for the fruits of labor. Work just as a sacrifice for Vishnu. Fully detached from the result. And it allows the soul to be active, but in a non-binding way. So one is protected from the material entanglement. So it combines karma, work, with jnana, avoiding matter. Right? So this is the best way to do it. And this detachment, it starts to break down the ego of I am the doer. And this is the key in self-realization. Right? Because why we should detach, Prabhupada is going to speak in the purports in the coming verses, because Krishna is the doer. He is the proprietor. We are simply borrowing Krishna's resources in anything that we do in this material world. You know, the demigods being different administrators are provisioning various resources, but those resources ultimately are coming from Krishna. So whatever we use in this world, whatever we manufacture in our fancy factories, are all coming from resources from Krishna. And thus, we must renounce the fruits of our work, because we are not the doer. And later in this chapter, Krishna is going to smash our ego with that very famous verse, Prakute kriyamanani gunaikamani sarvashaha ahankara vimutatma kartaham iti manyate, that you are not the doer. Right? But this is the foundation point Krishna is making for the next many verses, that one must do yajna. And this is a very advanced stage of a karma yogi that is being described here, because one is working just for the satisfaction of Lord Vishnu. Right? So Prabhupada gives us the important point at the end of the purport, that one must learn how to do this by the instructions of Krishna and Guru. It's not so easy. But by the mercy and instructions of Krishna and Guru, one can learn to work in this very advanced way. But what happens if one is, attached to the results? One is not yet ready to detach from the results. How should one work? Krishna is now going to speak on a lower platform, this Karma Kanda platform, in the next couple of verses. In the beginning of creation, the Lord of all creatures sent forth generations of men and demigods, along with sacrifices for Vishnu, and blessed them by saying, "Be thou happy with this yajna," sacrifice, because its performance will bestow upon you everything desirable for living happily and achieving liberation. Now, we're going to see the great compassion of Krishna. So here, we have this nature of being attached to the result. Right? We put forth effort because we want some result. We don't generally do anything without some desire for some outcome. Right? We work very hard in school for the benefit of getting a good job so that I may have some money to enjoy my senses. So this is a very deeply ingrained nature. Right? This is squarely in the mode of passion. The recommendation Krishna made of working as a sacrifice for Vishnu is not, that is our eternal nature, but our conditioned nature is quite the opposite. So it's not so easy. So, because we have this mood to enjoy our senses, certainly the inactive path isn't going to work. But if I'm attached to the results, what should I do? I'm here in this material world because I had some desire to enjoy independent of Krishna. And as soon as I want to be independent, I come to the material world. Right? And this position is certainly one of ignorance because I had forgotten my relationship with Krishna. So now what to do? I'm attached to sense desires. I'm ignorant of my relationship with Krishna. And I've lost my eternal situated place. Am I stuck? Well, Krishna, being so kind and loving and very clever, has put forth this process that he said in the second chapter to Arjuna, don't be distracted by the flowery words of the Vedas. And the question came, why did Krishna put all these practices in place if he doesn't want us to follow them? Well, it is for this person who is still attached to the results but wants to make some progress. What can they do? So Krishna says that one can enjoy everything desirable for living happily and achieve liberation. So simultaneously in the material world, one can enjoy some fruits while ultimately purifying from the desire to enjoy them. So one can have some material pleasures, but slowly come to the ultimate consciousness of surrendering everything to Krishna. So it creates a starting point for even one who is deeply in the mode of passion. Right? And so this is the very, merciful nature of the Supreme Lord. That if one is not yet ready to renounce everything as sacrifice to Vishnu, there is still a process they can start to slowly purify and come to that point. So in this karma kanda process, one has to agree that their sense gratification is still coming according to Vedic injunctions. That by doing certain processes enjoined in the Vedas, I can obtain some sense enjoyment. It is not due to my own ability. It is descending from some higher authority. Right? So while I'm attached to the senses, I know that by doing some different types of sacrifices, I can achieve some selfish pleasures. So it is starting to at least acknowledge I am not my independent doer. And by following them, one makes step-by-step advancement towards self-realization. So one can enjoy the senses and make progress. And this is the compassion of Krishna, making this system very easy to start. Yes, the Nishkam Karma Yogi is on a higher platform, but even one on a lower platform can at least start. And this makes it available to anyone and everyone. Right? Because if one works in a regulated sense enjoyment way, at least there's some progress. But if one enjoys their senses unregulatedly, then there is only sin and degradation. Right? So Prabhupada says in this purport, I just wanted to read this nice statement he makes. I just have to find it again. The Lord created this material world to enable the conditioned souls to learn how to perform yajnas for the satisfaction of Vishnu, so that while in the material world they can live very comfortably without anxiety, and after finishing their present material body, they can enter into the kingdom of God. That is very merciful of Krishna. So that is what he has said. Now, the 11th verse. The demigods, being pleased by sacrifices, will also please you, and thus by cooperation between men and demigods, prosperity will reign for all. So the point here is that we have to surrender to some higher cause. And there are two stages of this surrender: happiness in this life and happiness in the next life. And this is how one progressively advances. You know, as one begins this process, oh, if I do this yajna, this puja, I'll get some wealth, or I'll get a nice husband or a nice wife, or I'll get a son or a daughter or some family. So we do different sacrifices to obtain some fruits in this life, right? And when the results come from those different yajnas, our faith increases. Wait a minute, this stuff actually works. And then one begins to inquire, oh, how can I get more and more? And one studies and begins to understand, oh, well, if you do these yajnas, you can enjoy in your next life in heavenly planets and flying in celestial airplanes and drinking the soma rasa and all these different, heavenly pleasures. Well, oh, I can get pleasures in my next life if I do these yajnas, because they have faith in having done some initial yajnas that derive some immediate results. Now they have faith to do these that will derive a future result. But in doing so, one now has developed some consciousness of the soul. Because as soon as I aspire something for the next life, I know then there is some distinction between my body, which is not going to go with me, and I understand there is some presence of I as soul. So now the consciousness is elevating. And slowly this process will bring one to ask, wait a minute, all these pleasures I'm enjoying, they end. They're temporary. Is there a place where they're eternal? Where are all these things coming from? And that inquiry will slowly bring one to understand Vishnu. And then one will do sacrifice, yajna, as an offering to Vishnu. And that is how this process, enjoying the Veda, slowly brings one to the process of devotional service. Slowly bringing one to surrender and ultimately to bhakti. Now, Krishna is going to throw out all these sequential processes and explain why they are not good for us and ultimately take directly to bhakti, but he is laying out all the platforms, right? So this karma kanda process being described here is the gradual process to come to what Krishna said in verse 3.9, which is to do sacrifice to Vishnu. Okay? So now the final verse of today's section. In charge of the various necessities of life, the demigods, being satisfied by the performance of yajna, sacrifice, will supply all necessities to you. But he who enjoys such gifts without offering them to demigods in return is certainly a thief. So we have to detach to this superior power. This idea of I, unregulated sense enjoyment, will only lead to suffering. Because Krishna is saying, if you don't do yajna, you are a thief. Why a thief? Because we are using all these things that Krishna is providing. Right? Srila Prabhupada is explaining how all the facilities we are using, they are provided by nature, which is arranged by Krishna. So if I don't pay for them, I'm a thief. If I go to the grocery store and take one apple out the door, I'm a thief because I haven't paid to who has arranged for that apple to be in the store. So how do I pay for the different uses of the material world? That is through yajna. One must do yajna. But if I don't pay, we know, what does the thief endure? Punishment. So by just enjoying the material world according to my own whims, I must suffer the reactions. There is suffering. Just as a thief is punished, We are all thieving in our nature if we don't do yajna. So this is the important understanding of how, by doing this detached work, one can move from this very deeply engrossed mode of passion, to the mode of goodness. Right? When one detaches from matter ultimately by understanding these higher processes. Right? So this is in essence this, and Prabhupada is guiding us now that what is the ultimate yajna we should do? It is Sankirtan yajna. It is the only yajna that is practical in this age of Kali. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu came and taught us this process of Sankirtan yajna. No other yajna is required to do in this age of Kali. And actually, it is only the chanting of the holy names that can bring about the purification that we are aspiring for. Okay? So just to quickly summarize, and there's a lot of repetition in these verses and in the coming verses. And that repetition, just like Krishna repeated several times about the nature of the soul, is because this detachment from the fruits is not so easy for us. So this repetition is beneficial for us. So again, in summary, there are two ways to reach this platform of pure consciousness. One is active and one is inactive. And the key is to purify the hearts of all the material contamination that led us to this material world in the first place. And what is the best way to purify? By active work. It is better than inactive, premature renunciation. So doing detached action with knowledge will purify our consciousness so that we can ultimately take to devotional service. By engaging the senses in a higher taste, that makes the process very easy and enjoyable. And we get the help of Krishna. So going at alone, trying to detach from the material world without attaching to bhakti, to spiritual life, is a very difficult and miserable position that ultimately, most often, one falls back to their material desires. So the senses will get pulled back, and then lust develops, and that cycle ultimately the fall down. So because the nature of the soul is to be active, the key is to find the art of work, as Srila Prabhupada said. It is do work in a detached way, this Nishkam Karma Yoga, and one can purify. But if one can't do Nishkam Karma Yoga, there is an even entry-level path of even attached this Karma Kanda process where one can slowly purify. Now, we have to remember that ultimately Krishna is going to throw out all of these sequential paths because they are very long, one is not assured of success, and they're very difficult to do. And he's going to say, Patram Pushpam Phalam Toyam. Just do devotional service. He's made the process so simple, the highest of all processes, with the simplest of ways. Not easy, but simple. Right? So this is the first part of chapter 3, and next week we'll continue talking about the cycle of sacrifice and understanding a little bit more deeply and specifically about Nishkam Karma Yoga. Okay? So that's today's discussion. Any comments or questions today?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Prabhuji, thank you for the wonderful lecture, Prabhuji.
Mm.
Prabhuji, in the beginning you mentioned three things, Prabhuji. I was taking notes. There was one was Sambandha, you said. What were the other two, Prabhuji?
It's this is the kind of the process Chaitanya Mahaprabhu spoke about in terms of going from self-realization to perfection. So Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana. Sambandha is understanding our relationship with Krishna. And then once I understand my relationship, I act in that relationship. That is Abhideya, the practice of that relationship, which is servant of Krishna. And by acting in that relationship, one achieves the prayojana, the goal, the fruit, and that is Krishna Prema. So when I understand my relationship, I then act in that relationship. When I act in that relationship, I achieve the goal. And that is the three. And of course, the 6 Goswamis have established our Sambandha deity being Madan Mohanji, our Abhideya deity being Radha Radha Govindaji and our Prayojana deity being Radha Gopinath. In this way, one progresses to the ultimate goal.
So, Prabhuji, these three are required for what, Prabhuji? To understand Krishna, to understand the ultimate goal?
This is our development in the process of devotional service, because ultimately our goal is to achieve Krishna Prema. Right? So that's the Prayojana, the goal. But to know the goal, I first have to know what is my relationship with that object of love. That is Sambandha. Then I have to act in that relationship to bring out this love, to purify the heart of all the other impurities. Right? So that leads to, so these are like, the 3 steps towards perfection.
Prabhuji, I have 2 more questions.
Yes?
When you were showing that the yoga ladder,
Yes.
the 5 steps starting from 0 to 4, in Ashtanga Yoga, it says renouncing the fruits of knowledge and control of the mind and senses by the Eightfold Path. What is the Eightfold Path?
Stay tuned. Chapter 6.
Okay.
Krishna is going to tell us that the Eightfold Paths are Yama and Niyama, Asana, Pratyahara, Dharana, ultimately the Samadhi. So there are 8 steps. We'll discuss each of them in detail, but that's going to come in chapter 6.
Prabhuji, my last question is actually not a question. Can you please elaborate a little bit more on what exactly this Sankhya Yoga is? Because it doesn't seem to figure anywhere in this ladder. Or does it have a place in this 5 steps, or is it? What exactly is this Sankhya Yoga?
It's basically in Jnana Yoga. That's where it fits. It's this analytical study.
Okay.
It's the inactive path that one analyzes the distinction between spirit and matter. And it doesn't, again, bring one to the active side of the equation, but it brings one to the inactive side of detaching from matter. And it is done by, again, analysis and speculation. So that is the Sankhya Yoga.
Is this part of atheism, Prabhuji, or is it like is it still like trying to learn about Krishna, or is it like part of an atheistic study?
It's not. It can turn into atheistic. The problem, because if one doesn't begin to realize where the spirit comes from and the source of spirit, it can lead to an atheistic conclusion that I am the supreme spirit, and that's what the Mayavadis do, right? Because they deny the existence of Krishna as the supreme Lord and say that, oh, I take sannyasi, I am Narayan, right? So it can lead to an atheistic conclusion. It is not necessarily atheistic, but it can lead to that conclusion, and that's why, again, it's not a recommended path. It's very dangerous.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Very fast. Thank you.
Hare Krishna, Mataji.
I have one question, regarding that 3.8 verse.
Yep. Yes.
So there you said that if you do the devotional service, then there is no need for us to do other services like what was that?
I use the Pinda ceremonies or Shraddha ceremonies or other prescribed duties. Yes, various rituals. Yeah.
So if you can elaborate on that a little.
Yeah, because our Shastras discuss that Krishna is like the root of the tree. So when you water the root of the tree, automatically all the branches of the tree are nourished. You don't have to individually go out and nourish each branch that may contain various fruits. By just watering the root, you perform all. So by doing bhakti, ultimately these sacrifices we do, those rituals we do, they're to satisfy some debts, some level of responsibility we have in our existence here, right? So when we do the Shraddha ceremony, for example, to deliver our forefathers, Why? Because we have debts to them, because our existence is dependent on their mercy. So we have a responsibility to satisfy those debts. So, but by doing bhakti, bhakti is the all-in-one process in which one satisfies all of one's obligations. Because by pleasing Krishna, one naturally pleases all aspects of existence, right? Just like that root of the tree. And, in Srimad Bhagavatam, when Prahlad Maharaj asks for forgiveness of his father, basically looking to deliver his father, Nrsingadev says, by you becoming my devotee, he's already delivered. So by our practice of devotional service, we satisfy all of our, responsibilities. And that is why one doesn't have to perform such rituals. Doesn't mean one cannot. One can perform those practices. But one should do so with knowledge that these processes are connected to serving Krishna. So one should not do them thinking they are required to do because bhakti is not sufficient. So if one goes into that thinking, I have to do this because my chanting alone cannot achieve this, that is then compromising the potency of bhakti. Right? So one should not do so thinking one has to do it. But one can do it if they feel inspired to do so. So we have to understand both in parallel. One is not required to do it, because by doing bhakti one is automatically doing it. And Krishna is going to explain that at the end of the 8th chapter. At the end of the 8th chapter, which is entitled Attaining the Supreme, he says that one who does devotional service achieves all other results of other activities. So it's included, but then on top of that there is one more feature that is not included anywhere else, and that is attainment of the supreme abode. So you may have recalled I said earlier that when you do bhakti, you include all the different aspects of the lower rungs of the ladder. Right? So again, different ways. So that's how we should approach it. One is not required to do it because they are already satisfying it by bhakti. But if one chooses to do it, one should do it in the consciousness that in conjunction with devotional service. So is that clear, method?
Yeah. Thank you for the analogy, Prabhuji. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Pranam. Glories to Srila Prabhupada Guru Maharaj. Very, very nice lecture, Prabhuji. I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
So, first question is, we're talking about all these different dhyana yoga, karma yoga, and others. I know we know that bhakti yoga, the goal is Krishna prema, but through the other processes, have they proven that they are able to also reach the same goal of Krishna prema? Do you get Krishna prema from the other? I mean, I know karma yoga used to progress to bhakti yoga finally.
Yep, keep going.
So, from the other processes, can we achieve the goal of Krishna prema, or they can only achieve up to the Brahman stage only? And bhakti yoga is the only way that we can achieve Krishna prema. That's my first question.
Yeah. So remember, these are steps on the ladder, right? So as soon as you step on the first rung of the ladder, you can get to the top rung, right? By continuing to step. And the example is all Prabhupada used to give of, going to the top of a skyscraper. You can either go take the stairs and go step by step. So theoretically, you can get to the top of the building. Or you can just step in the elevator. Now the elevator is the direct process. Go straight to the top. And when you are in the elevator, you don't have to do the work. You just have to surrender to the elevator. That is bhakti. Meaning, by surrendering to Krishna, you can go directly to devotional service. By taking the stairs, in theory, you can get to the top. But it takes a lot longer. It's very difficult. You may stop midway through. You may get You may look out the window at the halfway point, oh, that's pretty nice here. I'll stay here. So it is, in theory, yes, karma yoga can advance to jnana yoga, to ashtanga yoga, ultimately, but it can take many, many lifetimes. And one is not assured of success in the end because one may become distracted by other ideas, other goals. So Krishna is saying, you are qualified to do either. You can go directly to bhakti. That is his greatest mercy. He doesn't establish some threshold criteria by which one can practice bhakti. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu just thus went out and preached to the most fallen of the fallen to prove. Right? And that's why Lord Nityananda approached Jagai Madai to show the magnanimity of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, saying if these two fallen people can be delivered, then people will understand the merciful process of bhakti. Right? So, yes, it can theoretically take the same point. They're all going to the top of the building. It's just a question of which one is better for us. So until we know the pros and cons and have knowledge about all these different processes, one cannot conclusively know which is better for me. And that's why Krishna is going to explain all these processes. And then he's going to throw them all out and say, don't do it. But if he didn't explain each individual one may wonder, okay, he's saying doing bhakti, but what about this? What about that? So he's giving all the what-abouts, and then he's very conclusively going to show us why bhakti is the recommended path.
Okay, but basically, the other yogas also, they invariably need to come to bhakti, right?
They have to.
They have to come. So basically, even if you're following the slow, dry path, whatever it is, invariably it has to lead to, it's only bhakti is the only way that you can get Krishna prema. There's no other path. Either you come directly, touch your nose like this, or around, but you have to, it's only that is the only process, right? So that is one.
If you're on the ladder, you have to continue going up the ladder to get to the top, right?
Okay.
It's not like, these aren't three different ladders, and they both take you to the top. It's one ladder, and they are sequential steps. Yep.
Yeah. And then I want to understand this karma kanda process. Is it the same as this? Because I don't understand what is karma. What is this sakam sakam karma yoga? Is it something like karma kanda?
No. So again, yeah, good question, because it needs to be clarified. A couple of things. It's not so clear initially, but there's a very distinct. And next week I'm going to lay out a little bit more clarity on this. But karma kanda means I do regulated activities, as enjoined in the Vedas, but for some material desires. I want to enjoy the fruits of my labor. So that is karma kanda. I do something, but I do it in a regular way. So I'm not going to enjoy my senses how I wish. I'll follow what the Vedas say in order to get wealth, in order to get a beautiful spouse, in order to get children, in order to get promotions, in order, whatever it is I want, I'll do some various yagyas. That is karma kanda. So there is a selfish motive. In Sakam Karma Yoga, because it is yoga, again, yoga means to unite with the Supreme, there is a surrender of the result, but it is still with desire. So I want the result, but I'm going to surrender it. Right? So there is still a desire for it, but one has some knowledge and a little bit of purification to surrender the result because they have a higher goal, a transcendental goal. So the goal isn't to enjoy my own senses, the goal is to progress in self-realization. So that is why Sakam Karma Yoga is still within the yoga ladder, whereas Karma Yoga is like the ground floor. It is not yet on the ladder, because the desire is for my own enjoyment. As soon as you detach from the fruit, you enter the yoga ladder. So that's the distinction.
I'm sorry, Prabhuji, I'm really...
No.
So karma yoga is not karma kanda, right? That
No.
two are different.
Two different.
So karma yoga is working with detached ways. Is that karma yoga?
Correct. So you do your work, but you detach from the fruit. That's karma yoga. In karma kanda, I do my work, but I attach to the fruit. I do my work because I want the fruit. So it's a lower level. But it's still under the Vedic process because the work I do is based on what's prescribed in the Vedas. The lower than karma kanda is I do whatever I want. I don't do regulated sense enjoyment. I go eat what I want, drink what I want, do whatever I want. Right? That is the lowest form. Because there one does so many sinful activities. At least in karma kanda, one can elevate in the material universe.
Okay.
Right?
And one more thing. So in karma kanda, the knowledge of Krishna, so it's karma yoga, knowledge of Krishna is there. I mean, they're detaching it from the fruits, right? So they know that they are surrendering to Krishna at the fruits. That part they know. The karma yoga.
They know that there is Krishna, Vishnu, a supreme Lord, but they don't know yet full realization of him as a person. So it is not Bhagavan realization yet. So there is, obviously they're surrendering to some higher authority, but they don't know yet Krishna. Right? So in Borijan Prabhu's Surrender Unto Me, he talks about, the devotee Sakam Karma Yogi, the devotee Nishkam Karma Yogi. This gets into a little bit of a subtle nature, but we, sometimes mix beginning Krishna consciousness with like karma yoga. But as soon as I know Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and I am rendering service to him, even in our immature state, that is within bhakti. That is not karma yoga. So karma yoga, I don't yet know Krishna, but I know there's some God, I know some higher authority.
Thank you so much for your patience.
No. These are intricate topics. So as I mentioned, I think 2 weeks ago, don't worry if these distinctions aren't resonating yet so clearly. After several weeks of discussing it, it'll become a little bit more clear. And ultimately, don't get into worry too much about the fine details. Understand the broad strokes, like we just discussed. These questions of karma kanda versus karma yoga. These are good. That's the broad strokes we want to understand. And then after that, it's okay. Remember, Krishna is going to tell us do bhakti. But it's good. We should know what is karma yoga versus bhakti yoga. What is karma yoga versus karma kanda. Like again, this line of questioning is good. Like we should understand this up to this point, this level, and then the minor, very minute intricacy details. We can let go. This is sufficient for us in what we're trying to pull away from this aspect of this section of Bhagavad Gita.
All right, thank you.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhu, is bhakti applicable only to Krishna or it can also be to a demigod?
Bhakti is only applicable to Krishna. It is devotional service to the Supreme Lord. Because when one worships a demigod, a devata, it is with desire for some result. Okay? Now the devotee, the bhakta, approaches the demigod with respect and acknowledgement of the position of that demigod in their service to Krishna. Right? But bhakti is the exclusive domain of service to Krishna. That is devotional service. So when Krishna says bhakti yoga, and he's going to spend chapters 7 through 12 describing very elaborately bhakti yoga. And in those chapters, particularly chapter 7 and chapter 9, he is going to very strongly denounce the worship of the devatas. Not to minimize their position, but to make sure we don't be confused by this topic and understand that bhakti is very distinct. It is the exclusive domain of worshiping Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
Okay. I have one more question too.
Yes.
By doing sacrifice to demigod or devotee of Krishna, one's one can reduce their material suffering, or it is directly connected to karma that they have to suffer, they have to use.
No, by worshipping a devata, one does not reduce their karma. One is increasing their karma. They may be increasing their good karma balance, but they are not reducing their bad karma balance. Because remember, good karma does not nullify bad karma. So when you worship a devata for different benedictions and boons, you're adding your good karma, but you're not subtracting your bad karma. So yes, whatever suffering you're destined to do, you'll get. But bhakti, Krishna says, aham tvam sardava papebhyo. Sardava, all of your pap, I will deliver. So in bhakti, one eliminates their sinful reactions. And more importantly, not only the sinful reactions, but remember that bijam and kutam, the nature to be sinful, the tendency to be sinful, that is what's destroyed by doing bhakti, so that future sinful activities will not happen. I can become free of my sinful reactions by, doing various prayaschitta sacrifices, taking bath in the Ganges. I can become free from my sins. But the nature to commit more sins is not purified by such activity. But by bhakti, the nature of one is cleansed as well. So this only happens in devotional service, and that is the great potency of devotional service. Is not only does it eliminate past sins, but it also removes this tendency and the proclivity to sinful life. And thus it creates a permanent solution, not a temporary solution, as Parikshit Maharaj calls the elephant bath. When the elephant bathes in a river or in a pond and then comes out and puts dirt on itself, this is this process of sin and atone, sin and atone, sin and atone. Right? Bhakti is the permanent process.
Okay, so one more question, Guru. Are planet positions have influence on our suffering, or it's only our karma only?
It is ultimately only our karma. There is no external force that pushes upon us suffering. But there are external situations that execute our suffering. So when we are suffering, it has nothing to do with any external force beyond some action we did previously that is now creating this reaction. Now those reactions are created by various arrangements of the material nature. Right? So the material nature carries out the different things that we are subject to, that we are to receive based on our prior action. So if I am suffering, it is not due to the inauspicious arrangement of the planets. My suffering is due to the actions I've done previously. Now the planets have arranged inauspiciously to deliver that suffering. But that is not the cause of the suffering. The cause was my action. Does that clarify?
Okay, yeah, for sure. Maybe I'll follow it up later.
Always remember the root cause of our suffering is our own activities. Then the various arrangements in the world are put forth to execute that suffering that we are due. Just like the jail cell is not the cause of our suffering. The cause of our suffering was the activity that led us into the jail cell. The jail cell is just constructed in a way to restrict sense enjoyment. But the jail cell did not cause our suffering. It is the vehicle by which we are delivered suffering. But the cause of my suffering was the activity that led me into the jail cell. So the material world is not the cause of our suffering. The cause was my defiance of my eternal nature. And that led me into this position. Right? So that is how we can understand the material world, and then the different things, whether it's astrology, whether it's different circumstances, inauspicious, auspicious things. Those are delivered to us based on our prior actions.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Anything else?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. This is Seisha. I had a question on verse 3.9. Why does Krishna say work done as a sacrifice for Vishnu and not work done as a sacrifice for me?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So, Vishnu is known as the ultimate beneficiary of all sacrifices, and remember, Krishna and Vishnu are one. They are one in two different moods. So they are not distinct people. So when I made the comment earlier that bhakti is the exclusive, domain of Krishna, that also includes Vishnu, right? In the Vaikuntha planets, there's pure devotional service being rendered to Narayan in the four-armed form. So they are not distinct or different personalities. They are one person, like the judge in the office versus at home. So, but we broadly understand that all the different aspects contained within the Vedas, they ultimately bring one to understanding, Lord Vishnu. So Krishna will speak, about himself as Krishna, coming up in the 9th chapter. But our understanding is when Krishna speaks about yajna to Vishnu or Krishna, there is no real distinction. The mood of worship is different. The mood of yajna in serving Vishnu is with awe and reverence, whereas the mood of yajna in the serving Krishna is with pure love. So, but that is a subtle detail that will be explained later in the Bhagavad Gita. At this juncture, the point is surrender to Vishnu. So that's why he speaks in that mood.
Okay, thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for attending. Anything else? Okay. Well, thank you very much for your kind attention, and we'll meet again next week. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda